Hey guys, let us begin. So, um, before we begin, let's start with a short presentation about proxy high availability and load balancing. My name is Artur Slontons. I'm a technical marketing engineer at Zabbix, and today I will be covering the workshop, both theoretical and practical part. As per usual, we have a chat over here where you can network and leave comments. And also we have a Q&A section where you can leave your questions about the workshop over here, and I will try and answer them as I go. So let's start with the theoretical part. Today we'll be talking about proxy high availability and load balancing. Before we get to the instance that I have prepared for you, I will talk about some of the new features that Zabbix 7.0 introduces. So first off, we have a new concept called proxy groups. Proxy groups are used to support the load balancing and high availability logic. And instead of hosts being monitored directly by proxies, in case of proxy groups, hosts are assigned to proxy groups. So here we can see in a screenshot, right? I have selected for this host to be monitored by a proxy group, Mystic Wanderer over here, instead of directly by a proxy. So proxy groups, they contain a number of proxies, and we'll see that in action in a moment. So over here, I have a couple of screenshots, creating a new proxy group, defining a failover period for it, defining minimum number of proxies in a proxy group, its description, the proxies it contains. Then down below, I have a list of proxy groups. We can see each of them has a different number of proxies, different number of minimum proxies, current number of online proxies, and so on. So in proxy groups, we have a couple of parameters. So we assign proxies to them, and then we can define things such as failover period. So failover period is the amount of time that is used to decide when a proxy is offline, if it's been online, or if a proxy is online, if it's been offline, and it's configurable. And we'll take a look at it. For a practical task, I will have a relatively small failover period, just so things are snappier and quicker, and we don't have to wait for 5-10 minutes for things to go up or down. We can also define a minimal number of online proxies for a proxy group to be considered online. So let's say in our practical task, I will have 3 proxies, and I can say that proxy group is considered offline if I have less than 2 proxies currently online in a proxy group. And if we have a number of proxies below the minimal number of online proxies that is configured, then the proxy group will stop doing load balancing logic. Whatever hosts are assigned to whatever proxies, they'll stay there until the proxy group is back online. Proxies of older versions will be excluded from rebalancing, so this is supported only from 7.0 and onwards. Then if a proxy group is offline, as I said, hosts assigned to that group will stop being rebalanced, not necessarily monitored. So if hosts are stuck to an offline proxy, they will not be rebalanced and they will not be monitored. If proxies are assigned to a proxy that is online, they will continue to be monitored by that proxy. So over here, once again, we can see a host and we assign it to a proxy group over here. And we have a couple of parameters. We'll look at them in the practical part of this workshop. When does rebalancing happen? So hosts are rebalanced based on the following conditions. The number of hosts assigned to a proxy differs from the average by 2 times or more. Only then rebalancing happens. And also, in addition, the difference is not less than 10 hosts. So at least 10 host difference between proxies must be there. And also the number of hosts assigned to a proxy must differ from the average by 2 times or more. If these 2 conditions are met, only then rebalancing happens. And hosts exceeding the average will be unassigned from proxies and then reassigned to proxies with fewer hosts. Here we have an example of proxy rebalancing in theory. So we have 5 proxies here, and we can see 2 of them are unbalanced. The proxy that has 60 hosts assigned to it and proxy that has 15 hosts assigned to it. Once the rebalancing happens, we will see, actually looks like there's a, over here. Rebalancing, each proxy now has 30 hosts assigned to it, balanced equally. When a new proxy is added to a proxy group, the group is automatically rebalanced. We calculate a new average number of hosts for proxy. Excess hosts are unassigned and then reassigned between the new number of proxies. In addition, there is a particular logic for agent configuration. Agents need to be configured to accept connections from proxies in a proxy group. For active agents, we need to configure server active. The server active parameter needs to contain at least one IP address, the address of at least one proxy from the proxy group, ideally more than one, because how this works is active agent talks to a proxy from a proxy group, and then it receives a redirect message, which will redirect the agent to a proxy with the fewest number of hosts. And if the initial proxy that the agent attempts communicating with is down, then the agent will not be reassigned and will fail to collect metrics, will send metrics over to proxy. That's why server active should contain at least two addresses, because if the first proxy fails to redirect, then the second one is probably online and it will redirect the active agent to a proxy with the fewest number of hosts. In case of passive agents, the server parameter needs to include IP addresses of all proxy nodes in a proxy group. We can use IP ranges over here in server configuration. We'll take a look at how it looks like for me in a moment. Okay, now let's get to the practical part. I have a Zabbix 7.0 instance over here. And what we're going to do in this workshop, we're going to play out a couple of scenarios, such as assigning hosts to proxy groups, taking proxies down. We'll take a look at the agent configuration, and we'll do a couple of other things. So if you have Zabbix 7.0 in your environment already, you can follow me, but I understand that this can be quite complex to follow because, of course, you need to have various proxies deployed in your own environment to follow this. What I've done is I've deployed proxies in Docker containers running on the same VM where the Zabbix instance is, just for the sake of the demonstration. Of course, in real life, this will look a bit different. I can see we have a couple of questions or comments. Does the proxy group take into account the number of items that each host has? No, it takes into account just the number of hosts. That's how it currently works. Will agents older than 7.0 support this? No, because they cannot react to these rebalancing messages. But they can still be monitored by proxies. They will not be rebalanced. How can I let Zabbix agent know the new member in a proxy group? So in case of active agents, once again, if you have at least one member of the proxy group in the server active configuration, the agent will be redirected, and we'll actually see how in a moment. If you have passive agents, then you need to contain the addresses of all proxies in the server parameter. Is it possible to configure proxy priority per agent? So currently there are no proxy priorities or weights or anything like that. Yeah, it will be somewhat random, let's say. Yes, that's something that we already hear from people. You maybe want weights or priorities or something like that. 7.0 is just out. We'll see where we go down the line with this feature. I also see some questions in the Q&A. So active agents, I already said they talk to a proxy from a proxy group that is configured in server active, and then they get redirected. Rebalancing rules cannot be customized. Okay. Why are there limitations with SNMP traps? So yes, proxy groups do not currently support receiving SNMP traps. That is, let's say, a missing piece of the current design. We are looking into it down the line in further releases. How do I work out how many proxies I need in my proxy group? You don't really work it out. You simply figure out the workloads that your proxies can handle, what are your redundancy rules in your environment, what are your infrastructure requirements, and so on. You're not seeing the screen. Okay, I'll reshare the screen in a moment. Let me stop my share and I will reshare it. Hold on. You should be able to see the screen now. Can you guys confirm in the chat, please? Okay, all good. A colleague of mine just confirmed it. Thank you. Okay. So let's take a look at what I have over here. So I already have created a demo proxy group. Its name is demo. The failover period is 10 seconds. That means if a proxy is not responding for, it was Zoom chat masking it. Yeah, probably. Failover period of 10 seconds means that if a proxy is down for more than 10 seconds, it'll be considered as offline and host will be rebalanced. If yeah, the same goes for online logic. If proxy is online for 10 seconds and more, it'll be counted as online. And minimum number of proxies is 1 in this here group. That means if we have less than 1 proxy, the whole proxy group is considered down, but we will play with this here setting. As for proxies, let me navigate to proxies. I have 3 proxies. In this hypothetical scenario, we have them in different locations. Let's just imagine that in reality they're Docker containers, but let's say this is done for redundancy purposes, right? Network losses between data centers, things like that. Currently, they're not monitoring anything. And if I go to data collection hosts, I have around 50 hosts with Zabbix agents installed on them, currently monitored by Zabbix server. So what I've done here, let's open up the command line. And I will open the agent configuration so we can take a look at the agent configuration example. So in the server parameter that's already open over here. So for server active, I have added addresses of all of my proxies over here. So they're containers running on this environment. So we simply use port mapping. Over here, they use the same address, but different ports. But those are 3 separate proxies. So that's server active. Let me look up server. Next. Where do we have server? Over here, I have used just the IP address over here since they're all coming from the same IP address, just different ports. I have permitted for all of the proxies to poll my agent. Let me know if anyone else is having issues with my voice. Should be fine, actually. We're on a wired network. Okay, colleague is telling me that we're all good. So apparently it's not on my side. Thank you for the comments. All right, let me check the Q&A before we begin. We'll move the Q&A chat away from my screen so it's not blocked. What do you consider the value of taking a proxy group offline in a situation where a single one is still available? So proxy group offline, essentially, it's a good question. That means that rebalancing logic has stopped. Maybe we have some very lightweight proxies, and let's say we have minimum number of proxies is set to 2 proxies, and we know that a single proxy will not be able to handle all of the load. So in case if a single proxy remains, we keep the whole group offline. We don't rebalance anything until everything is back up because it'll be too much load for that 1 proxy or maybe 2 proxies. So it very much depends. You can configure your group like I currently have. Let me show you in proxy groups where minimum number of proxies is 1, right? And that means that proxy group will be working essentially at all times if at least a single proxy is available. So maybe that's a scenario that you want to have in most cases, but if you know that a single proxy simply cannot handle all of the workload from the proxy group, it will just start performing badly because maybe it's running on embedded hardware with the SQLite database. Then maybe this makes more sense having a minimum number of proxies be different than 1. So we have a proxy group. We have our proxies. So let's go to proxies. We'll click on each one of these proxies over here. I will assign them to a proxy group, right? And over here we have a new parameter, address for active agents. So this is what is used in these redirect messages sent to active agents. So I will type this in, 248, and I think I had port mappings saved somewhere. Let me do podman ps. So over here we can see that proxy Boston over here, 10067 for Boston. I'm currently, so let's configure Boston 10067. Let's add Boston to a proxy group. 10067 is the port. So this is what gets sent to active agents. So that's for Boston. Now we can see proxy Boston is assigned to a demo proxy group. Now let's do Baltimore. I will add the proxy group demo, and I will add its address and port. And to check the port, I need to look at Podman PS to see the port mappings. So I was looking at Boston. Oh, wait, Boston looks like, I was looking at Baltimore. Let me check Baltimore. Baltimore is 10065. 10065. Let's update. And once again, this is a particular use case where I'm running containers in my environment and running proxies in those containers for demo purposes. Now we'll assign the LA proxy also to the demo proxy group. Same address, but different port, LA 10061. Okay, so now I will have all three of my proxies assigned to the demo proxy group. They currently have no hosts assigned to them. So let's go to data collection hosts. I will use mass update. Select all of my hosts over here, mass update. And over here, let's see, we will select monitored by, and you can see we can select server proxy, and we have a new option called proxy group. So let's select our proxy group over here, demo. Let's update it. Let's wait for our host to be assigned to the demo proxy group. And in a bit, when we move to administration proxies, we should see everything be load balanced. Meanwhile, I'll take a look at your questions. How is the online status of a proxy determined? So those are proxy heartbeats that are determining if a proxy is reachable or not. And yes, active, passive proxies are both supported. And in the context of proxy groups, once again, we have the failover period that we look at right over here. So if proxy isn't responding, if its last seen age is more than 10 seconds, it'll be offline. By default, the value is something like a minute or a couple of minutes. I don't recall. I've changed this to 10 seconds just to make things snappier in our environment. Does each proxy in a group need to use a different IP address and port, or can they all use the same? They can all use the same port. Currently, I'm using a different port because I'm running all of them in containers on a single VM. As for the ports to not start conflicting with one another. API should fully support all of the new proxy group features and assignments and so on, yes. How are trapper items handled? Trapper items should still work. SMP traps I know are not supported. As for trapper items, they should still work with proxies in a proxy group. So you're sending items to Zabbix trapper on a proxy. It should be able to collect that if a host is assigned to it. No limitations regarding a number of proxies in a proxy group. Can auto registration actions set proxy group? So we can actually take a look at this now. If we go to actions, let's say auto registration actions, let's see if we have create action. What kind of rules do we have? So over here in operations. So if we're talking about actions, so over here we don't have explicit add host, let's say, to a proxy group operations. But if a agent registers to a proxy from a proxy group, actually, that's a good question. I don't know if it'll be assigned to a proxy directly or a proxy group. That's a good one. I'd have to check our documentation how that works. I can see that there are no explicit operations, but what happens if, yeah, if a proxy from a proxy group, that we can take a look at that later. That's actually something that I need to clear up myself. For server active, we can only put one, but it's not too good. Yeah, someone's already explaining this. Yes, comma-separated proxy addresses will cause duplicate data. I think that should be a semicolon. I think Marco also mentioned that in their blog post, which is actually up on Zabbix blog. So read up on that if you want to know more internal details of how, let's say, traffic is handled by proxy groups, and communication between proxies and agents is done in the context of proxy groups. Yes, you should be able to assign a host to a proxy group through API. What should be mentioned in host? What is the max? Okay, what should be mentioned in host configuration monitored by proxy group or proxy? So like I said, for configuration of host, so I assume you mean of agent, it's just server and server active that you need to configure. What is the maximum amount of data proxy can store and for how long? Depends on the proxy and the database backend that you are using. Same for CPU and RAM overheads. Depending if you use MySQL or SQLite or Postgres, that will very much differ. It's based essentially case by case basis on your buffer configuration and so on. So now if we go into administration proxies, we can see that hosts have been assigned to 3 of our proxies, right? We added them to a proxy group, and now we can see them load balanced. Over here, we have Baltimore, Boston, and Los Angeles proxies, and the hosts that have been assigned to our demo proxy group have been balanced across 3 of these hosts. And here we can see their item counts, the values per second each proxy is collecting, and of course, the number and list of hosts monitored by our proxies in the proxy group. So now let's do the following. Let's see rebalancing in action. Let me open up my command line and I will stop one of the proxies. So let's stop Zabbix proxy Boston. Let's see, systemctl stop. That's a typo. So Zabbix proxy Boston should be stopped now. And in a moment, we should see it going offline, and actually our host should be rebalanced. Okay. Meanwhile, I'll take a look at the Q&A. In the host config in the front end, so if we take a look at any of my hosts, I used mass update, and I assigned the host to be monitored by a proxy group. So let's take a look at application node 1, for example. And we will see that it's monitored by a proxy group, right? The demo proxy group instead of the proxy directly. Okay, I'm just looking at the questions. Give me a second. If the server goes down for some time and during that time the active proxy in the proxy group change, will the server recover all missed data from each proxy? So if I understand the question correctly, proxies will still continue collecting what they've been assigned to collect. If a server goes down, there is essentially no load balancing that's happening, right, once the server is down. So proxies will continue collecting data from the hosts that they are collecting the data from. They will store it in their database and push it back to the server as soon as the server is back up. Which database solution is provided by default by the repository packages for a proxy of the proxy group? Depending on which you download, we have SQLite proxies, MySQL proxies, Postgres proxies. So that very much depends. The default that most people go with usually is SQLite, since it's very lightweight. You don't need to deploy MySQL. By default, it creates the database file itself. So that's the easiest way to get started, SQLite. Is Zabbix Sender supported by a proxy group? As far as I know, yes. I'm not sure what are the caveats there. I haven't seen them myself, but the only thing that is not supported, as far as I know, are SNMP traps. Zabbix Sender and regular traps should still be supported. Is the proxy group priority based on the server active parameter? Proxy group priority, or do you mean proxy priority? Not, the question isn't really clear. Server active should contain all of the proxies, well, not all, but proxies from the proxy group that the host is assigned to. The priority, which the proxy, which will monitor the agent, doesn't really depend on the sequence of how addresses are added in the agent file. With respect to the SNMP trap limitation, could you simply send to multiple proxies, or is there a more complicated reason this won't work? That's pretty much the reason. You have to send to multiple proxies, and then there are various design decisions how we would handle it. So currently, it's not supported. Like I said, we are working on a more robust, maybe SNMP trap collection logic that would support proxy groups more reliably without having to send traps to everything. Risk duplicates or just spammy metrics and so on. How does server host item configuration work for proxy groups, I guess? At the same time, will there be delay sending to each of the proxies in the proxy group? Not sure about that question. Does database need to be centralized? So all of this is still stored in Zabbix server database, all of this information about proxy groups, proxies, and so on. So there is still that central database for Zabbix server. Okay, we have a whole discussion going on in the chat. That is good. Okay, let's do one thing. So I switched off one of my proxies. Now let's go into administration. Proxies, let's check that the proxy is indeed offline. We can see it's offline. It's been offline for 5 minutes. And actually, we can now see that rebalancing has happened, right? We can see hosts have been rebalanced across the 2 remaining proxies automatically. Their required VPS has increased, of course, the item count has increased, host number has increased, but the rebalancing is fully automatic. Now let's do one thing. Let's change the minimum number of proxies over here for the demo group. I will change it to minimum number of proxies 2. I can currently see I have 2 online proxies with minimum number of proxies also being 2. So let's bring down one more proxy and stop essentially bring the whole group offline and see what happens. So I will bring down proxy Baltimore. And in a moment, we will see the proxy group going offline. Meanwhile, while that is happening, let's see what is the current discussion. Will a proxy going offline lead to gaps in collected data? So there might be a gap depending on your failover period, right? Is it 1 minute, 10 seconds, 10 minutes, 20 minutes? So of course, for that amount of time, no data will be collected. But once a host is rebalanced to a different proxy, the data collection will resume. So for a sender, you'd still need to forward the data to the yeah, correct server or proxy in this case. Can discovered hosts also automatically be switched to running proxies like ESXi? So once again, we're talking about auto registration, or I assume either discovery via LLD or network discovery. Once again, as far as I know, let's take a look at our network discovery. So let's see discovery. And once we create a new network discovery rule, so currently it looks like we can only discover our host by server or proxy. No proxy groups are available over here. So they'll be assigned then directly to a proxy, at least currently, instead of a proxy group. So like I said, the data would be lost if a proxy goes completely offline. and then based on failover periods, you'll have gaps for that failover period until the host is being monitored by a different proxy. No ability to configure proxy priorities. The proxy will be random, that's correct. So if we're talking about low-level discovery, low-level discovery is done by essentially a low-level discovery rule on a host, right? And if we're creating hosts from prototypes, that should still be monitored by the same host as the original host that created it. We're still monitored by the same proxy if we're talking about host discovery. Okay, let's go to administration proxies. And we can see two of our proxies are offline. Let's take a look at proxy group and then switch back to proxies over here. So we have our demo group. Its state is offline now because we have only a single proxy online. Well, the minimum number of proxies is 2, right? And what happens is at this point, load balancing stopped working. The proxies over here in the proxies section, this here Los Angeles proxy will still continue monitoring these 24 hosts, while Baltimore proxy won't be monitoring anything. So this is where you'll have gaps in data because balancing logic has stopped completely. At this point, we have only a single working proxy. The hosts currently are stuck to it. They will not be rebalanced. And that's something that you have to, once again, consider. You need to have 7.0 agents for load balancing to be able to probably bounce the hosts across the proxies, yes. Now let's do the following. Let's bring everything back up and see how things are rebalanced. So I will start Zabbix proxy Baltimore, and I will start Zabbix proxy Boston. And we should see everything going back to normal and our hosts once again being rebalanced across all 3 proxies. Let's start these back up. When an offline proxy comes back online, so it should send the backlog. Yeah, the question is when an offline proxy comes back online, does it automatically fill in the missing data? So it would still behave as a regular proxy. If it's because of a short network outage, the proxy was actually up, but there were network issues. It will still send, yes, the data back to Zabbix server, and it should be filled back in. So just as with regular proxies. So a question about HA clusters. So in case of Zabbix server, it's a bit different. Yes, we have Zabbix server nodes. What about HA cluster for proxies? How can we make it? So essentially, this is the approach for both HA and load balancing, right? This is the way you create proxies, you assign them to proxy groups, and that way you have load balancing and also high availability. In this case, I have 3 proxies in 3 different locations, 3 different data centers. So this is essentially also HA. If a Baltimore proxy goes down, its host will be automatically assigned to Boston or Los Angeles. So that's our current approach to HA. All right, we can see all of our hosts are back online. Let's wait for a bit. We should see everything rebalanced. As per, I think, my calculations based on the average number of proxies. So we have 50, average number of hosts, 50 hosts. Divided by 3 would be the average. So something like 17, 16 hosts average. And let's see if this gets rebalanced. Yes, so based on the average logic, Currently, the average was 25 for 2 proxies. Third proxy was started. Difference was more than 10, and based on the logic of average, it was rebalanced over here. And now we have 16, 17 proxies, 16, 17 hosts per each proxy automatically rebalanced, as you can see. And we'll let the configuration to be updated, and now we can see item counts, values per second, and so on. Can a proxy group contain proxies with different versions in the future? We added some proxy backward compatibility. I'm not sure what we will do when 7.0 is out and how load balancing would it behave with newer versions of proxies or older versions. In that case, when you update your server to 7.2, will load balancing break or not? Chances are, since in our current backward compatibility logic, proxies won't accept any new configuration changes. Maybe proxies assigned, maybe host assigned to a proxy of an older version will stick to it and will not be rebalanced, but we'll see when 7.2 comes out. How often are they rebalanced? So they're rebalanced based on the calculation in the presentation that I showed you. So we need to have the following logic. Let me quickly, let's see. So this here logic needs to apply. Hopefully you can see my screen. So the number of hosts assigned to a proxy differs from the average by 2 times or more and is not less than 10 hosts, right? So we had a new proxy with no host whatsoever, while other proxies had 16, 17 hosts. So that's at least 10 or more host difference. That is also different from the average by 2 times or more. So therefore rebalancing happens. So as soon as this is true, rebalancing happens. Yes, but when every how many seconds, as soon as the configuration is grabbed from the configuration cache, Zabbix will try to recalculate. So configuration update is grabbed from the cache. Zabbix will try and update the proxy load balancing as per this here logic. And once again, we need to consider the failover period over here also, right? So on top of that, we have the failover period. So as soon as Zabbix reloads its configuration, and also remember the proxy is counted online or offline based on failover period over here. And this isn't the default. This is quite a quick failover period that I have created just for this here presentation workshop. By default, it takes, I think, 1 minute or maybe a bit more for proxy to be counted as failed. Then it's updated. Then Zabbix server needs to be aware of these configuration changes, get its new configuration that, hey, when proxy is offline, then it will rebalance everything. And then the same for when a proxy is back online. So it's not necessarily instantaneous based on your configuration update periods. It can be near instantaneous, but not immediate. Will NVPS balancing be a function or a feature in the future? Depends. No comment currently. Is there the possibility to set different times for considering the proxy online or offline? So this is per proxy group. For different proxy groups, yes. For a single proxy group, this is what you have. This is configured for all proxies in a proxy group. Can one proxy have multiple proxy groups with different sets of hosts in each node? When we take a look at a proxy, let's look at proxy configuration. So we can select only a single proxy group over here. That's it. It will be a single one. We currently have single. We can create another one just for the demo's sake. Create a proxy group over here. So let's call it demo 2. So default failover period is 1 minute. Here we can see it. And if we go to proxies, we will see that we can only select one proxy group over here. Let's try just that, demo 2. As you can see, it got automatically replaced, right? Demo and demo 2. Data will be stored on proxy or Zabbix server database. First on proxy, then sent to Zabbix server, just as it was before. All right, and from the looks of it, that's proxy load balancing. Once again, don't forget to take a look at your agent configuration, server parameter over here, and server active parameter over here, right? Server needs to contain the IP addresses of all of your proxies in the proxy group. Server active needs to contain at least one, ideally more addresses of proxies from your proxy groups. And then create a proxy group and proxy groups like we have over here. Configure failover periods, minimum number of proxies, give it a name, and then assign your proxies from the proxy section. Over here, click on a proxy that you've created, assign it to a proxy group, provide its address for active agents, and then in data collection hosts, update your hosts either one by one or simply by using mass update over here like I've done, mass update, and assign it to a proxy group over here. There you go, and you'll be good to go. When I must do a proxy update within a proxy group, the host will automatically balance. So if you're doing an update, you're bringing up a proxy offline, most probably. So it'll be considered offline. And then once again, this here logic from the presentation will kick in. So as for this session, the recordings together with the presentation will be available. So you should be able to follow this on our YouTube channel. And there you'll be able to see a recording. It'll be uploaded in the coming days. Final question, can a proxy be in multiple proxy groups? No. One more question, we have the time. A simple way not to lose data from one cluster is to make two proxies. If first is dead, second proxy automatically will get the data and transfer it to Zabbix server. So if first proxy is dead, if it's actually dead, then we'll have a gap in our graphs, of course, because whatever it has collected and hasn't managed to send to the server, if there is such a scenario that it hasn't sent something, that will be lost. But second proxy, based on failover periods, will take over and start monitoring that host. For the assignment of proxies, it doesn't rely on the number of items and their weight present on a host. No, it's simply the number of hosts, and that's it. Only host distribution. Yeah. No items, no new values per second currently, at least. All right, guys, so feel free to play around with this. Like I said, an easy way to do this, like I've done this in my environment, is using Docker containers and deploying proxies that way. I was using Podman to quickly deploy proxies. So that's one way you can just play around with it, see how the logic works in action, maybe create a set of hosts via API, configure your agents, see how things get rebalanced. Do you recommend Podman or Docker? I think Podman is more simple, but that's not necessarily like a Zabbix related question. It's just my preference and something that I use currently. I found it easier to create hosts from it. I've also used Docker before directly for quite a lot of time. So currently I'm using Podman. But once again, in real life, you'll probably have your proxies on physical hardware or VMs or containers in different data centers. So it'll look quite different than it does in my environment. All right, guys, thank you a lot for this session. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them on our forums, subreddit, or under the video once it's uploaded, which should be in the coming days. Take a look at some of the caveats in the documentation, how the things work. We had a couple of questions about API, about sender, so feel free to read up on that. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to answer everything off the top of my head, but a note should be there. If not, we check our forums, we check our subreddit. There are various community channels, for example, Telegram and such, where you can ask your questions and we'll gladly look at them. So thank you. Have a great evening. I hope this was useful for you. And If you have any feedback about proxy groups and load balancing and HA, feel free to leave it once again on our community channels, or if you have a feature request, we have a separate section for that in our bug tracker portal. Thank you guys. Have a great evening. And we have more workshops coming up. Check out our webinar section. We'll see you there. Bye, everyone. Thank you.